You're doing 65 in a 30-foot motorhome. Coffee's brewing in the back. Nobody's buckled in. There's nothing to buckle into. Just a couch and a dinette bench. A semi cuts you off. You hammer the brakes. Here's what almost no one driving one of these knows. The cab up front just took the hit, and it's the safest seat in the vehicle. Everything behind it has never been crash tested. Not once. Cars can't be sold in America without passing crash tests. Motorhomes skip it entirely. We found the 19 worst performing motorhomes ever built. Fireball fuel tanks, collapsing bunks, roofs that peel away like tin cans. This is the list the RV industry prays you never see. The Chevrolet P30-based Class A motorhomes of the 1970s and 80s. The P30 chassis was everywhere in this era. Fleetwood, Coachman, and a dozen other builders slapped their motorhome bodies right on top of it. The problem wasn't the frame, it was the fuel tank. Many of these units used the same side-saddle style fuel tank design that got GM's own pickup trucks dragged into a massive federal safety investigation. Mounted outside the frame rails with almost no protection, these tanks were exposed in exactly the spot most likely to get crushed in a side impact. Investigators found that a moderate side collision could rupture the tank and ignite fuel in seconds, with the closest exit sometimes 20 feet away, behind a table, a couch, and a narrow aisle. When you're talking about a vehicle this heavy, moving this fast, a fuel-fed fire isn't an inconvenience. It's a death sentence with a very short clock. The Ford Econoline E 350 Cutaway Class C motorhomes. If you've ever seen a boxy little motorhome with a van cab up front and a big camper body bolted on the back, you've seen an E350 Cutaway. Here's the danger. The factory-built Ford cab is reasonably solid, but the second you cross the seam into the camper body, you're in territory Ford never designed, tested, or crash-rated. Engineers examining post-collision E350 Cutaways found the mounting bolts connecting the camper box to the chassis frequently sheared or bent in frontal impacts, allowing the entire living space to shift independently of the cab. In several documented crashes, the body separated far enough from the frame that occupants in the rear were thrown violently. Even in impacts, the cab itself survived relatively intact. The front seat might save you. The back half of your home on wheels was never built with your safety in mind at all. The Winnebago Brave, built through the late 1970s and early 1980s. The Brave earned its name from being one of the more popular motorhomes of its era, but brave is also what you'd have to be to trust its structure in a real accident. Inspectors who examined crash-damaged units found the aluminum skin over wood frame construction, standard for the time, offered almost no resistance in a moderate-speed frontal collision. The wood structural members underneath the skin were prone to splintering rather than absorbing impact energy the way a modern crumple zone is engineered to do. Once that wood gave way, the entire nose section could crush inward at a rate several times faster than a passenger car of the same era. Add in cabinetry, propane lines, and appliances suddenly turned into flying shrapnel, and you've got an interior that becomes dangerous even in crashes survivable by the cab up front. The Coachman Leprechaun, various model years from the 1980s and 90s. The Leprechaun was a favorite for first-time RV buyers, budget-friendly and popular with families. But that affordability came with a trade-off engineers flagged repeatedly. The cab-over bunk, the sleeping area that hangs directly above the driver's cab, was a huge selling point for families needing extra sleeping space. In frontal collision analysis, that same cab-over section became one of the most dangerous places in the entire vehicle. With almost no structural reinforcement and a heavy mattress and frame suspended above the windshield, a hard frontal stop could send that entire bunk section crashing downward into the cab area. Anyone sleeping up there during a daytime drive, which happened more often than most families would like to admit, had almost nothing standing between them and a catastrophic fall directly onto the dashboard. Quick side note, most car problems come from small things people overlook. I put together a simple longevity guide based on everything I've learned, and it walks you through exactly what to watch for. It's linked in the description below. The Itasca Sunstar, mid-2000s production. By the 2000s, you'd expect motorhome safety to have caught up with the times. The Sunstar shows how far the industry still had to go. In slide-out failure investigations, and yes, slide-outs are exactly what they sound like, sections of the wall that mechanically extend outward to create more living space. The Sunstar's slide mechanism showed a troubling pattern. In moderate side impact scenarios, and even in some hard cornering and emergency braking events, the slide-out structural seal and support arms were found to separate from the main body frame. That's a multi-hundred-pound wall section with zero remaining connection to the rest of the vehicle in the middle of a collision. Passengers seated near a slide-out, which in most floor plans includes the dinette and the couch, the two most commonly occupied areas while the vehicle is moving, had essentially no protection if that wall let go. All right, before we get to the top 14, and trust me, they get a lot worse from here, do me a favor. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling me which motorhome on this list actually surprised you, and if you're new here, subscribe and tap that notification bell so you don't miss the next one. We put a lot of research into these videos, and it genuinely helps the channel when you do. Now, back to the countdown. The Georgie Boy Cruisemaster, 1990s production. The Cruisemaster was a workhorse of the RV rental fleets throughout the 90s, which means thousands of first-time drivers with zero towing or big vehicle experience were behind the wheel. Post-accident structural reviews found the Cruisemaster's floor framing, the wood and steel lattice that everything else in the coach sits on top of, showed a consistent weak point, right where the entrance step and door frame met the main chassis. In side impact and rollover scenarios, this junction point failed disproportionately compared to the rest of the structure, essentially acting like a hinge that let the entire entry area fold inward. Given that the entry door and steps are also the only viable emergency exit in most of these units, a failure right at that hinge point meant trapped occupants in exactly the collision scenarios where getting out fast mattered most. The Holiday Rambler Imperial, built through the 1980s. The Imperial was marketed as the luxury option, and in terms of interior finishes, it was. Structurally, luxury did not mean safety. Engineering teardowns of crash-damaged Imperial units revealed that the extensive use of decorative wood paneling, built-in cabinetry, and heavy appliance packages, refrigerators, ovens, generators, added enormous unsecured mass throughout the coach. In frontal and rollover testing simulations, that mass didn't stay where it was supposed to. Cabinet doors popped open, refrigerators shifted from their mounting brackets. Heavy appliances became projectiles moving at the same speed as the vehicle a half-second before impact. The very features that made the Imperial feel like a rolling luxury apartment were the same features that turned a survivable crash into a cabin full of blunt force hazards. The National RV Dolphin, late 1990s to early 2000s. The Dolphin looked every bit as solid as its price tag suggested, but investigators looking into a string of highway accidents involving this model found a specific and troubling failure point: the windshield mounting. In frontal collision testing, the enormous panoramic windshield that gave the Dolphin its signature look was found to separate from its frame under impact forces that a standard automotive windshield, bonded with modern urethane adhesive, would have easily survived. Once that windshield came loose, the entire front cap structure lost a huge amount of its rigidity, since the glass itself was doing more structural work than anyone at the factory apparently accounted for. The result was a front end that crumpled further and faster than its size and weight should have allowed. The Rexall Rexair, 1990s and early 2000s models. Rexall built a reputation on aggressive pricing, and that reputation came from cutting corners in places buyers couldn't see. Structural reviews of the Rexair's chassis-to-body attachment points found significantly fewer mounting bolts than comparable motorhomes in its class. In some units, nearly 30% fewer connection points between the living quarters and the frame beneath it. In real-world rollover incidents, this meant the body was more prone to separating from the chassis entirely, rather than the two staying connected and absorbing impact energy together the way engineers intend. A motorhome body that detaches from its chassis mid-rollover isn't just structurally compromised. It's an entirely different, far more violent kind of accident than the one the driver thought they were having. The Fleetwood Bounder, 1980s production years specifically. The Bounder became one of the best-selling Class A motorhomes in American history, and later generations genuinely improved. But the earliest Bounders, built before Fleetwood's major structural revisions, carry a documented history worth knowing. Fire investigators looking into a cluster of Bounder incidents traced a recurring cause back to the generator compartment, mounted low and to the rear, dangerously close to both the fuel system and the propane tank. In rear impact scenarios, and even in some hard braking situations that shifted cargo weight backward, that generator compartment showed a pattern of fuel line stress and eventual rupture. Combine a fuel leak with a hot generator engine, and you have every ingredient needed for a fire. Positioned at the one end of the vehicle, occupants are least likely to be near an exit. The Jayco Redhawk, mid-2000s Class C models. You'd think a 2000s motorhome would be leagues ahead of its 1980s ancestors in terms of safety. In some ways, the Redhawk was. In one specific way, it wasn't. NHTSA, Complaint Records and Engineering Follow-Up, found a recurring issue with the seatbelt anchor points in the dinette conversion bed, a feature marketed heavily as a place for kids to ride safely while traveling. Testing found that the anchor bolts, drilled into wood cabinetry rather than into the steel chassis structure beneath, could pull free under loads far lower than federal seatbelt standards require. That means a feature specifically marketed as a safe place for a child to sit during travel was, in a genuine collision, potentially no safer than sitting unrestrained on a normal bench seat. The Gulfstream Conquest, 1990s and 2000s models. The Conquest built its reputation on interior space, and one of the ways it maximized that space was with an unusually large basement storage compartment running beneath the main living area. Structural engineers reviewing accident reports found that this basement design, while great for hauling gear, significantly weakened the coach's lower frame rigidity compared to competitors with more continuous floor framing. In side impact and rollover testing, units with the largest basement compartments showed measurably more floor deformation and cabin intrusion than Gulfstream's own smaller floor plans built on the same base chassis. More storage space, it turned out, came directly at the expense of the structural integrity holding the floor beneath your feet together. The Tiffin Allegro Bay, early 2000s production. Tiffin has a strong reputation in the RV world, and much of that reputation is earned. But a specific run of early 2000s Allegro Bay models revealed a serious blind spot. Post-crash inspections found the roof-to-sidewall seam, the joint where the roof cap meets the vertical walls, running the entire length of the coach, used an adhesive and fastener combination that performed dramatically worse in rollover testing than the company's later designs. In documented rollover incidents, this seam was consistently the first point of structural failure, allowing the roof to peel away from the walls rather than staying intact and preserving survival space for occupants inside. When a roof separates like that in a rollover, occupants aren't protected by a shell anymore. They're exposed directly to the road. The Monaco Diplomat, late 1990s diesel pusher models. The Diplomat represented the high end of the market, a diesel pusher with the engine mounted at the rear instead of up front. That layout has real advantages for handling and noise. It also created a specific danger investigators flagged repeatedly. Because the engine sits behind the living area rather than in front of it, the entire front cab section of the Diplomat had significantly less mass ahead of the occupants to absorb a frontal impact the exact opposite setup of a traditional front-engine vehicle. Crash analysis found that Diplomat drivers and front passengers experienced measurably higher deceleration forces in frontal collisions compared to front-engine motorhomes of similar overall weight because there was simply less material in front of them to soak up the hit before it reached the cab. The Forest River Sunseeker, 2010's Class C models. The Sunseeker sits on a Ford or Mercedes chassis, depending on the trim, and on paper, that should mean modern automotive-grade safety underneath. The problem investigators found wasn't the chassis. It was everything built on top of it. In frontal crash simulations, the transition point where the factory cab ends and the camper body begins showed inconsistent reinforcement between different production years, with some units missing structural gussets present in others from the same model line. That inconsistency meant two Sunseekers that looked identical from the outside could perform completely differently in an actual accident, and there was no reliable way for a buyer or even a dealer to know which version they were looking at just by walking the lot. The Newmar Bay Star, early 2000s models. Newmar built the Bay Star with genuine quality in mind, which makes its specific failure point even more sobering. Investigators looking into a series of rollover accidents found the issue wasn't the frame or the roof. It was the water and holding tank placement, mounted low and to one side rather than centered and balanced. In emergency swerve testing, this off-center weight distribution measurably increased the Bay Star's rollover propensity compared to more evenly balanced competitors of the same length and weight class, particularly on units with a full holding tank, which many owners drive with regularly without realizing the safety implications. A design choice made for plumbing convenience ended up directly affecting how the entire vehicle behaved in a panic maneuver. The Coach House Platinum, various years. Built on a compact chassis and marketed as an easier-to-drive alternative to full-size Class A coaches, the Platinum earned loyal fans for its maneuverability. But that same compact size created a crash safety trade-off engineers flagged directly. With less overall vehicle length and mass than larger motorhomes, the Platinum had a shorter crumple zone in absolute terms, meaning the distance between the front bumper and the occupants was simply smaller. In frontal collision comparisons against larger Class A units, the Platinum's cab area showed higher intrusion rates relative to its size because there was less structure available to absorb energy before the impact reached the people inside. Smaller and easier to drive doesn't always mean safer. Sometimes it means the opposite. The Freightliner XC chassis, Class A motorhomes of the early 2000s. The Freightliner XC chassis was considered a step up, a genuinely engineered commercial-grade platform used by multiple high-end builders. The problem wasn't the chassis engineers built, it was what motorhome manufacturers built on top of it without matching that same level of engineering. Structural reviews found a recurring pattern across multiple brands using this chassis. The body-mounting brackets connecting the living quarters to the frame were rated for static and dynamic road loads, potholes, cornering, braking, but were never actually crash-tested as a complete assembled vehicle. In real-world accidents, this meant a chassis that performed exactly as designed, paired with a body that behaved completely unpredictably, because nobody had ever tested how the two would interact in a genuine collision until it happened on the highway, with real families inside. The Chevrolet chassis Class A motorhomes involved in the GM side-saddle fuel tank investigation of the late 1980s and early 1990s. We're back to where we started, and that's not an accident. This is the single most dangerous motorhome platform ever put on American roads, and it's the one that finally forced a reckoning. The side-saddle fuel tank design we mentioned at number 19 wasn't just a flaw. It was, according to federal investigators, directly linked to hundreds of fire-related deaths across GM's chassis-based vehicles, motorhomes included, over more than a decade. In side impact testing conducted as part of the federal investigation, these tanks ruptured and ignited at collision speeds far lower than what regulators considered an acceptable threshold. For a motorhome specifically, that meant a fire could start in seconds, directly beneath the living space where families were eating dinner, sleeping, or simply riding down the highway with no idea what was mounted just a few feet beneath their couch. GM eventually agreed to a massive settlement and safety campaign rather than a full recall, and by then, an entire generation of motorhomes built on this platform had already been sold, driven, and in far too many documented cases, burned. And that brings us full circle to where we opened this video. That family driving down the interstate with nobody buckled in the back, trusting that the giant comfortable box they're riding in was built with the same care as the car parked in their driveway. In almost every case on this list, it wasn't. The chassis underneath might be solid. The engine might be reliable. But the living space, the part where you and your family actually spend every mile of the trip, was often an afterthought bolted on top, tested for water leaks and road vibration, but never for the one thing that actually matters when everything goes wrong. So here's the takeaway if you're shopping for a motorhome today, whether new or used. Ask about crash structure, not just floor plan. Look up whether your specific model and year had any of the issues we just covered. And if you already own one of these, know where your exits are. Keep your holding tanks reasonably balanced, and please buckle up back there, even on the couch, even for a short drive. The RV industry has come a long way since the days of the P30 side saddle tank, but as you just saw, a long way doesn't mean all the way there for every single model still out on the road today. If this video opened your eyes to something you didn't know about your own rig or one you're thinking about buying, that's exactly why we make these. Give it a like. It genuinely helps more people see this before they get behind the wheel of one of these units. Drop a comment and let us know if you or someone you know has owned one of the motorhomes on this list. We read every single one. And if you're not subscribed yet, now's the time, because we've got a lot more of these deep dives coming, and you don't want to miss them. Hit that notification bell so you're the first to know the second the next one drops. Thanks for riding along with us today. Stay safe out there, keep that tank balanced, and we'll see you in the next one.